Alright, and this is Video Game Growing Pains. We are back to talk about Final Fantasy II. This is the Japanese Final Fantasy II, not what we in the West knew as Final Fantasy II. That was Final Fantasy IV. Confusing, I know. Anyway, I want to talk about Final Fantasy II because I first played the remake on the PlayStation 1. It was, oh dear God, it was an incredibly ambitious game, but it was also a very frustrating game. Looking back, it's actually very interesting in the way the game is designed. Brilliant in places, but also incredibly stupid in other places. Let me lay out the story for you. About four orphans are running from an evil empire. They get cornered by the knights who wipe the floor with them, and then they wake up in the castle led by a resistance leader. This actually was an interesting departure. The original Final Fantasy hadn't included sort of consequences in battle. You had setup, yes, like I am Garland, I will knock you down from the first Final Fantasy. They gave you setup before a battle, and you would see the resolutions afterwards. But you couldn't actually lose a battle and progress in that game. Here, though, you could. It was a real change to narrative point. That being said, there's also an even greater change. Now, a lot of Western RPGs like to toy with the idea of conversation trees. You have topics that you can talk to people. The Ultima series did this very well. Well, Final Fantasy II was the Japanese equivalent. Basically, if someone was a member of the Resistance or a sympathizer, you could provide them with a list of passwords, and these were basically topics. You could talk about the Empire, you could talk about that Dragon Knight you'd heard of, you could talk about Sid and his wacky airship, or the birds roaming the plains, the giant yellow ones, who we know as chocobos now. It was interesting because the game didn't really hold your hand with the storytelling. It said, we have a story, we want you to go find it. And sometimes you had to. You had to interrogate everybody to get that piece of information, to get that little tool that you needed to find where you were going to go. That was a really brilliant idea for narrative structure. It created a much more engaging story. The characters didn't have as much, well, character as I would like, but they had more than the first. The enemy is an evil empire, a recurring theme through Final Fantasy, but they also were an empire with monsters and demons, and also your standard human knights with you, so it was pretty cool. Where the game started to fumble was the battle system. The idea behind the battle system is genius. The execution is laughable. Stop me if you've heard this one, but you're fighting in a battle. You take a lot of hits. After you heal at the end, you suddenly feel stronger because you've taken those hits. Your muscles have improved. You're used to taking more hits. Your HP is increased. Sounds like a good idea, right? You actually get stronger just by playing the game. That would have been great if they had done that. The problem with Final Fantasy II, though, is that you have to grind an insane amount just to stay on par with the monsters. And more than that, the grinding is incredibly frustrating because you don't gain traditional levels. Like I said, your attributes increase depending on what you do in a battle. You cast more spells, you get more magic. You attack more, your strength goes up. You take hits, your hit points goes up. You defend against attacks, your defense goes up. It goes up incredibly slow, though. So slow that it is almost impossible to play the game. I can't imagine what the original was like on the Famicom, but the remake I played, it was agony just trying to get to the next checkpoint where you could actually say, okay, I've got enough strength to do the next dungeon. Incredibly frustrating. More to the point, you also got weapon skills. The more you used a weapon, the stronger you get with it. However, that was also incredibly slow, and you couldn't get multiple skills or multiple points in a battle. At the end of a battle, you would either get attack, defense, hit points, magic, what have you, but only that one skill. How much it improved depended on how much you did. This led to a lot of people cheating in the game. I don't mean using a game genie or the like, but they exploited flaws in the code to try and increase their character strength rapidly. Even I'm guilty of this. And even doing that, it was still an incredible grind. So I have to say that the battle system is the most flawed part of the game. The music is once again excellent. Nobuo Uematsu creates one of the first prototypes of the Chocobo theme, and some similarly evocative music to the first one, with a bit more of an emotional twist, and with good reason. A lot of characters die in this. This introduced not only character death, but the idea of guest characters to the Final Fantasy universe. Characters who were stronger than you, offered some unique ideas, but who were also expendable. They couldn't get past a certain point. Their level was capped, and so they were only useful for the story point. They would help you with monsters, certainly, but you couldn't get too attached to them. However, we didn't know this going in. We would get attached to these characters like, oh, they're so much better than our guys. I hope we can keep them. And then, death. It was a brilliant stroke of narrative for what was at the time a 1980s, 1990s game. It was very daring early on. And the battle system, though I berate it constantly, it was an interesting departure. It was something new that Square was trying. And I appreciate that. The best part about Final Fantasy II is the music and the unique narrative twists. Looking back, we can see some brilliance in how they approached it. Very much like the Ultima series, as I said, you had to find information for yourself. You had to go looking. The game didn't hold your hand. That being said, it gave you a few directions, and you were to try and look at them. You need to find out about the Dragon God? Okay, here's the topic. Go ask people. But I bet there's someone in town A who knows about it. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It was not quite throwing you into the deep end of the pool, but they didn't let you linger in the shallows either. You had to work to get the story and to get where you were going. Regrettably, the story is a little forgettable, especially in this day and age with more modern twists and flashier animations, but it's an interesting look back. I would say Final Fantasy II probably was the most daring, but also one of the worst until we hit Era 5. But we'll get there. We're still in Era 1. We're still in the early years. So stay with me as we talk about the last Final Fantasy of the early years, Final Fantasy III, which is even more daring than Final Fantasy 1 or 2 and tries so hard to hit the mark and misses only by a small margin. Stay tuned.